But here we are. This is the Crescive method. Today we're rocking solo. We're going to be talking about soil balancing and mineral chemistry. Just a reminder, we do have some master classes coming up. So the microscope master class is the next class that we're going to be offering. We're still accepting applications. Got a few more days to go on that one before we close it. We're going to be doing a special stream this Sunday for microscopes, and we're going to fire up the microscope, and Sarah's going to show you some cool stuff and kind of give you an idea of what we can expect in the microscope masterclass. So that's available on the website. And then for those of you, we are doing a mineral balancing masterclass, and that will be starting here soon. In the next couple weeks, we'll be announcing the actual start date, but it'll be sometime in the first or second week of September likely, maybe the third week of September. But anyways, we're taking applications. Jump on, let us know you're interested, and we'll get you involved for that class. So today I just wanted to kind of speak generally about what's going on in the world of soil chemistry. So this is part of our basics program. And one of the most important components of living soil is, soil. So, we kind of come from a history, especially in cannabis, of disposable soil models. And I think that's been one of the most difficult mindsets to overcome. It's also steered soil chemistry management into a non-sustainable, problematic system, essentially. And because of that, most people that are doing soil-based have a tremendous fear over large volumes of soil. We see it every day in our consulting works where large farms choose to go with small containers because the fear of choosing a large soil volume could be costly. And if you're not managing soil chemistry and you don't understand the basics and foundations of soil chemistry, then it definitely is a little bit of a problem. So kind of 30,000 foot view is we've got a history in cannabis and in farming in general to have very destructive practices in regards to soil chemistry. And I think a lot of that is because we've been misguided as to what the targets should be and what's healthy from a mineral chemistry standpoint. So we're now moving into climate crisis. We're now moving into climate instability, global warming, climate change, whatever you want to call it. They've been trying to warn us since the 70s, and I feel like 2019, 2020 is when like the average suburbanite is like, I think the weather's kind of screwy. So we're here, y'all. We're here. And so for some of you, we're here in a crisis for cannabis, and we're about to be in a crisis for food. Let's just be real. We're trying to keep it light on the show, but nonetheless, the importance of understanding soil chemistry has never been more important. If you're a cannabis farmer, the disposable soil model is over. I mean, that is not financially viable for any business moving into the future. It's far too costly from a purchase standpoint. It's far too costly from a labor standpoint. It's far too costly from a soil chemistry variation, complication, problem, toxicity, deficiency standpoint. And it really is in your best interest to make one large volume soil purchase, balance that soil chemistry, and then maintain that soil chemistry. It's just not financially viable, from my opinion, as somebody who analyzes some of the smallest and largest farms on the planet. I'm pretty good with a spreadsheet. I can just tell you it's not going to be financially viable into the future. And so I'm trying to give you a heads up that if you want to continue cultivating cannabis into the future, it's going to be in your best interest to manage a soil volume as long as possible. So that's kind of one of the things I wanted to touch on today. Soil chemistry is a massive concept that takes a lot of time to cover. In our soil balancing class, we meet for 8 weeks. And we have access to each other for a year. So we have a discussion forum where we're able to solve problems and commune and come to solutions and bring everybody up to speed. It is my personal desire to take you all, run you through the class, and put you right to the top of qualifications in the industry. We're already doing it. We've got some people that are doing it. David King is getting real close to really be turned loose on the market. So pretty soon here, we're going to be introducing y'all to that gentleman. Who David is a long-term cannabis grower that is now putting his investment into his education for a sustainable future as an advisor. It's my personal opinion that the cannabis industry, the farming industry, the planet at wide is going through a change in paradigms. And it used to be the era of who you knew. So, in cannabis specifically, you were successful if you knew someone that could move your product. And with the legalization of cannabis and how that's changing the landscape, it's becoming less and less viable as a business model to know people far away from your home to send your flower to. That business model is going out. And so we're moving into the era of knowing how. You have to know what it is you're doing. We can't just rely on astronomically high margins compared to other business enterprises in the world to where you can make repeated soil purchases, to where you can throw things away. And so the climate, the financial condition, the changes in the market are literally demanding that you become sustainable in your practices, that you become sustainable in your choices with how you approach the cultivation space. We're starting to see a big rise in market gardeners and other agricultural enterprises. And in those cases, you can't throw away the soil. So the unique aspect of cannabis is we get 4 harvests in a calendar year, typically in a living soil world, 4.5, depending on how you want to count it. But nonetheless, we're making damage or improvement at 4 times the rate of the traditional farmer. So if you're a market gardener, the same principles apply to you, and you cannot neglect soil chemistry. So as far as obstacles for what you got going in soil chemistry is if you're relying on packaged, dry, top-dress products, because of the nature of the NPK game and the NPK, the 3 numbers on the front, none of the products that I've seen contain adequate levels of calcium in order to maintain soil chemistry from what I would believe on personal experience in our consulting work of what those targets of managing soil chemistry are through the Albrecht principles, managing base saturation, or what would be the distribution of what they call the cations, so calcium, magnesium, and potassium, in relationship to some of the anions, sulfur and phosphorus, and your nitrogen and trace minerals. Like, these things cannot be neglected because these quantities of nutrients have an effect on the behavior of the soil, the porosity of the soil, the ability of water to infiltrate into that soil, and they need to be managed with appropriate ratios. So if you're relying on an off-the-shelf bagged product, at best, it might have 10% calcium. So from like an Albrecht principles, we're looking for a distribution that looks something like 68% to 72% calcium, 10 to 14% magnesium, and maybe 4 to 7% potassium. If you have a product that has 10% potassium and 10% calcium, are you going to maintain a 70 to 4 ratio? No. And within 2, 3, 4, 5 harvest cycles, you will disrupt that soil chemistry to such a degree that all hell will break loose. And anybody that's been growing in the ground or in soil beds in the cannabis industry either has personally experienced this or has a friend or family member that has experienced this. And this is part of the fear behind large soil volumes. Now, if the fear of a large soil volume pushes you into a small container, that is going to be a fear-based decision that will ultimately lead to your demise because of the instability in a market that requires stability. So the standard practices of throwing away your soil and top dressing with heavy amounts of very magnesium and very potassium and very nitrogen dominant products leads to soil chemistry that ultimately will lead to far too much magnesium, which magnesium has a pulling force on the soil. Calcium has a pushing force on the soil. So your soils become very tight and constricted. It makes it harder for water to infiltrate. It makes it harder for air to infiltrate. And you end up with yield quality reductions, and you end up with an increase in pest and disease. That's just across the board. I'm not bad-mouthing any one particular product. They all adhere to the same basic ratios, regardless of how much I do or do not like those products. So What is being required of you moving forward is managing soil chemistry from, in my opinion, a balance of the basic cations, calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and managing the other components in line. Some of you are familiar with the Malick 3 test, which is where our example's coming from today. So we're just going to kind of jump into some of these numbers. This is a Logan Lab report of something that I see almost every single day in my work. It's not necessarily, specific to one soil product. They're all kind of following these same basic problems. And so what I've got here is an averaging of numbers I saw about a week or so ago that I used as an example in my soil balancing class. And what you have here is 4 pallets or 4 greenhouses or 4 truckloads. And the same trends happen across any size and scape. If you get 4 2 cubic foot bags, they might be this varied. So let's just kind of go down the numbers. I guess I'm used to speaking to the soil balancing class, but I realize we need to probably start at step 1 of what these numbers mean. So the first thing I look at is this number called the total exchange capacity. The total exchange capacity is a formula that takes into consideration calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and a couple other values, and it spits out this number. This number can be loosely indicated or loosely communicates the total nutrient pool because it's taking into account the total amount for calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium. Where it gets confusing is this exchange capacity word gets used with regards to clay, and that's not what we're talking about here. So it's very confusing for people. But nonetheless, for the purpose of cannabis and potting soils, in my personal opinion, based on our consulting results, you really need to be over a 20. And that would mean that you've got more than 2,000, 2,500, somewhere in the 2,000 to 3,000 parts per million calcium range. It's my belief that you should always maintain over 2,000 parts per million. So you can see that of our 4 samples here, we've got 2 that are well below, 1 that's over, and 1 that's right at. And we'll just say that this is 4 greenhouses that came from a full truckload, and we sampled all 4 of those greenhouses independently. And this variation is what's revealing itself. I really like numbers. I feel like I'm really good at pattern recognition. And what I see in this situation is, picture this as a conveyor belt. So we've got soil going into a blender and it's coming out the other side. And that soil is starting at one end and it's working its way through a conveyor belt. Somewhere along that conveyor belt, either a human throws in minerals into a mineral blending apparatus, or there's a hopper that is supposed to evenly dispense the minerals. And this is one of the most common reasons for variation that we see. And I believe that's what is happening in this case. I've worked with 4 major soil blending facilities. One of those has the largest piece of equipment in the entire United States. So I have diced this process up like you would not believe. And what I think this is this is a truckload of soil that came from a facility that's using more of a conveyor belt type mineral blending, soil blending process. And I would think this first tote was actually the last bin of the previous one, and it didn't get all the minerals because based on what I know about this soil blender, they typically end up higher than a 10. So I would think that actually batch 1 and batch 2 didn't get all of the minerals that they were supposed to get. And it's either because they ran out in whatever batch came before 1 and 2, or because the minerals got stuck in the hopper and so they weren't being dispensed. And what makes me think that is this sulfur number. So we've got 2 of the 3 samples at a 300 part per million. We got 1 a little bit below and 1 that's double that. So probably what happened is the gypsum got stuck in the hopper or the mineral blend that contained the gypsum, and it got stuck. And somewhere after row 1 or batch 1 and 2, they realize they poke it with a stick and then it all dumps out. And so you get more than you intended in group 3. And then by group 4, it starts to get more appropriately distributed. And so why is this a problem? Well, if you've got 4 beds or 4 pots or 4 greenhouses or 4 acres, and they vary by 100%, that is going to trickle down to absolutely everything about your plant growth characteristics, your yield, how those plants respond to the nutrients. So most of my work throughout the week is taking numbers just like this and making them all look like each other. And this is one of the techniques that I teach in the soil balancing class because I believe that this is of the utmost importance. We have other advisors in the industry speaking to this variation being the cause of the test. None of my experience shows that that's really true. I believe the variation that's coming from this test is coming from the variation in the soil. And I'm speaking from a place of experience to where I've very tightly analyzed several soil blending facilities physically in person. And then in my consulting work, I've done analysis of pretty much every soil that's produced on the planet, and they all have the same characteristics. So I assure you that the Mehlich 3 test from Logan is accurate, and the numbers that they are showing you are that remarkably varied because the soil is that remarkably varied. If you take the same results and you look at the saturated paste test, they might only vary from 10 to 15%, which I think falsely confirms this concept that the Mehlich 3 test is inaccurate to those that are speaking that. And you're even starting to see soil companies take the Mehlich 3 test off of their website because it shows this clear variation. And it's much easier to get an attractive saturated paste test on a starting soil blend than it is to get all the Mehlich 3 to align, because that relies on consistency and the way that you do this process together. So I will stand firm that the variation on the Mehlich 3 is because the intense variations in soil, either you mixed it yourself or you got it from a soil blending facility and they mixed it fairly inaccurately. And this happens everywhere. This happens in my own soils, and it's just something that you as the farmer who receives the soil needs to manage. And so I believe you need to manage it through soil chemistry, and you need to make a decision. You need to make a decision on what is your goal. If you have a soil that only has a 10 exchange capacity and it's well below 2,000 parts per million of calcium, you will guaranteed see Group 1 and Group 2 start to look hungry before you get to the finish line, where Group 3 and Group 4 might make it without looking hungry. And so typically what the farmer does is if this is 4 beds or 4 greenhouses or whatever, they're going to see hunger triggered in batch number 1 and batch number 2, and they're going to make the decision to feed everything more. And so now you have a condition where you're reacting to the entire farm based on hunger of a underlying soil imbalance. And then now you're going to be overfeeding number 3 guaranteed, and you're likely going to be overfeeding number 4, which will lead to pest problems in 3 and 4, and you'll be just barely correcting the hunger issues in 1 and 2. Now, if a farmer is going to push feed, they're likely going to push nitrogen, which in this case, these soils don't need any nitrogen. So now you're trying to correct a calcium deficiency and an overall imbalance and lack of nutrition across the board with just nitrogen, which is a mathematical guarantee for spider mites. So the strategy to see a nutritional deficiency and treat all zones the same is going to lead to a problem in all zones. So we're not going to want to do that. And so we have to make a decision. Do we want to try and average these numbers, or do we want to try and take them to one common consistent number? Well, for that, then we're going to want to decide what we want to do with these other numbers. The second thing I look at on a soil test is this base saturation. Depending on what type of soil you got and what the context is, the numbers are a little bit different. But generally speaking, this number should always be above 68. Keeping it somewhere between 68 and 72. This magnesium needs to be somewhere between 10 and 14. We got a 3% over here. That's going to be a serious problem. So we've got a significant magnesium deficiency on all these soils. Potassium, in my opinion, for cannabis and potting soils should always be above 4%. I think this is one of the lowest ones I've seen in a long time. So I think we've got a soil blender that's starting to skimp on the minerals, and they're just not putting what they have been putting in years past. So that's a problem too. But nonetheless, every single one of these is going to show significant starvation well before you get to and through the flowering cycle. I think another attractive number is this exchangeable hydrogen. I think this is one of the more valuable aspects of this Mehlich 3 test. For whatever reason, in potting soils, when this number gets above 10, 15, 20, you start to have bug problems. If you've been really cramming the fish hydrolysate and you're at the 20 to 50 range, you're going to have biblical pest problems, root aphids, all kinds of shit. And it's just going to be a mess. This exchangeable hydrogen starts to show up when pH is below 7, and it impacts the uptake of calcium, magnesium, and potassium. So this is kind of like helpful in a way for the reduction of complex minerals, but it becomes a problem when it's starting to impact calcium, magnesium, and potassium. So generally speaking, they're all deficient in magnesium. They're all very drastically deficient in potassium, and that needs to be addressed immediately. And then you can scroll down to the bulk density. So this is the weight of the soil. And so further confirming the variation, you have a weight in the soil. So what's interesting is number 3 has the lowest weight compared to its friends, but it's got the highest concentration of minerals. So that's really interesting how that happened. I'm honestly not sure how that happened. Typically, more minerals means more weight. The compost is the heaviest part. So somehow batch 3 got more compost and more weight, but not all the minerals. I don't know. This is kind of a mess. But nonetheless, you got to make a decision. And so we need to make a decision on what we want to do. And I would probably go to the high value. So if all 4 of these are remarkably varied, one of the easiest ways to make them all the same is take them to the highest value for each component. And so I translate that across. So, we've got a 10, 11, a 19, and a 13. My personal opinion is we need to get above a 20 for exchange capacity. Our highest sulfur value is 600, so we could probably take everybody to there. Our highest phosphorus level is 125. We need to take all of them up. But nonetheless, I hope you can see what I'm trying to accomplish in that one of the ways to make them all the same is go up to the highest in all of them and then balance all the numbers. So one problem though is even if we go to the highest value for all of them, we're still straight dog shit for our base saturation ratios. To be clear, these plants are going to have some serious problems. This can't be ignored. And then when you look at the saturated paste test, it looks pretty attractive, and people ignore it because the saturated paste they've been told to make more important, and you're just going to be screwed chasing your tail. So this is a spreadsheet that I use. I know a lot of you aren't really interested in spreadsheets, but for those of you that are, this is what I do in my personal work. So this is kind of like a general target section. These are the individual samples transferred from the Logan. This is a column that calculates average. There's a column that calculates high, so you can kind of get a number on what your targets are. One of the things I'm pretty proud of is this section down here. So this takes the variation from the ideal base saturation, and you can get a deeper look at what it is that's going out of whack. So we're all significantly deficient in magnesium. These are all negative numbers, meaning calcium divided by magnesium is wrong. So we're low here. We're pretty much even or slightly high on calcium, so at least that trend is the same. You can see significant deficit. We're barely halfway of the potassium needs, and we've got some sodium issues. We've got some sodium irregularities. That just speaks more to the irregularity of the amendments being put into the soil. And then I like to compare some trace minerals. I didn't put them on this test, so they're not filled in, but there's also other comparisons for trace minerals. Another thing I'm most proud of that you don't really see anybody talk about, that after we start pumping more students out, you will definitely be hearing about it. One of the things I like to do is take the part per million value, and you can turn that into grams per cubic yard, and you can get an idea of the mineral distribution of this soil. And I find it's a lot easier to compare samples that are different. So this is the total of all the samples over here. Sample 1 has 522 grams of element. Sample 2 is almost 600, 840. If you take all the high values, it gets you to 982. And from my opinion, this number should always be maintained 1,000, or you are not going to get the appropriate commercial yield. So, this was a very expensive premium soil that didn't give you half the nutrients. So that's a pretty big problem. So what we got to do is we got to calculate that. I don't know if it makes sense to calculate live on TV here. I'm going to take a second to look at some of the questions. Yeah, I was having some problems with the sound earlier, not gonna lie. So we got it sorted out. Does it at least sound normal now? When Sarah's here, it gives me a chance to kind of look at the comments a little bit better. So hopefully I'm not still sounding too robotic. We can do some of the questions here maybe. How much do you charge for a breakdown on the pulse meter? I don't really charge anything. They think the main thing with the pulse meter is, managing soil. Moisture is a big part of the basics of soil. The meters available at this level all have a problem. I've mentioned several times that I love blue mats, but the blue mat meter is the first thing to break your heart and drive you crazy. So I use it once or twice to see what 100, 120 millibars looks like. I prefer to use the pulse meter. I think the advantage of the pulse meter is it maintains a history. So you can pull up the app on your phone, and if you go through your soils consistently from one end to the other, you can see variation in moisture. I think that's the most important. There are a couple caveats to the Blue Lab pulse meter. One is if you leave the battery in it, the battery drains down and very quickly the numbers get very erratic. So I don't even put the battery cover on there. I leave the battery out of it. I have a heavy duty cup that I can put the meter in and drop the battery in. We advise most of our clients to get a little 2 AA rechargeable battery thing and then just keep a very charged battery in there. The way that meter works is it's sending a charge across 2 prongs, and it takes a lot of energy, and for whatever reason they just put a single AA battery in there. They probably should have put 3 or 4 somehow, but nonetheless, don't store the battery in it. Keep a really fresh battery in it if you want consistent numbers. And then I set the depth gauge. There's a little snap clip depth gauge on it, and I leave it at the shallowest depth. If you try to get it to 30-40% at the bottom of the pot, you will give yourself root aphids, guaranteed. So you want to just be sampling the top 4 inches of soil. Now, depending on what type of soil you have is what the numbers will be. So the numbers aren't the same for every farm and every container and every soil. So I always advise to verify the moisture readings with a microscope assessment, because that's my ultimate moisture meter. So we need to let the microbes tell us what the appropriate moisture is. But generally speaking, most people with the Blue Lab pulse meter, somewhere between 30 and 40% is the right moisture percentage. But again, when I say that, people then try to get it to a target, and that's not the goal. The goal is identifying variation from corner to corner. That's the real value of that tool. Don't get too hung up on 28 versus 32 versus 41. You need to be looking for gnats. So if the soil has too much moisture, you will get gnats. So the appropriate moisture range of living soil is more moisture than wilted plants and less moisture than a bunch of gnats. So, and then within that range, what is the variation from corner to corner? All of the problems in your farm, whatever scale, have to do with the variation from corner to corner. So the plants next to the dehumidifiers, they're going to be drier. In a greenhouse next to the wet wall, they're going to be wetter. In the center, they're going to be less wet, but still too wet. And then by the exhaust fans, they're going to be the driest. And so if you have an irrigation style that's putting the same amount to all corner to corner, you're going to be having things that are too wet, and you're going to be having things that are too dry. So the biggest strength of the Blue Lab pulse meter is managing the variation and identifying where the variation is so you can make corrections, if that makes sense. And so in the Blue Lab pulse, it gives you a little readout that stays the history. I mean, it stays forever. I have 3-year-old history on my phone. And if you always go through your farm in the same order, that history will always line up. And so if you just, put it every couple feet all the way down the row, and you stand back and you look at that, you'll see that little thing go, whoa, we got a dry spot right in the center. So you need to do that. So you're getting 25% at 100 millibars. Yeah, so you're doing pretty good. I would tend to, well, it depends on your strategy, I guess. We add nutrients. So if you leave the blue mats set to 100 millibars, that's wetter. So it's a weird number because the higher the number is, the drier it is. So if you leave it at 100 millibars, when you add liquid feeds, you're kind of pushing it into the too wet zone. So I tend to leave it slightly drier to leave room for adding. So yeah, and that's my thing. And people want a more concrete answer, but I don't see anything more concrete than the presence of gnats. They are the most consistent indicator of too much moisture. I can promise you that. So what I do is I like to take the little yellow sticky cards, put them in the little flower holder, and I put one in every 4x4 space in a bed, and I like to angle them towards where you can see them as you walk down the rows, and you will find immediately where it's too wet. As soon as those gnats start popping up on that yellow sticky card, hopefully you kept a log of how much water you've been giving. And if you look at the life cycle of the gnats, you can kind of translate 3 to 5 days prior is when you kind of reach the point of too much moisture, I guess you could say. So I tend to think it's extremely important to maintain some sort of calendar that defines how much water you've been giving. And then when you see those gnats pop up, you can look at that last week and go, that was a little bit too much. Let me back it down. So yeah, just gnats are the most consistent little animals in this entire thing. And most people just try to kill them. I use them as a gift. They are trying to tell you exactly where the irrigation leak is. They are trying to tell you exactly where the stagnant corner is. They are trying to tell you exactly where the shady corner is. They are trying to tell you exactly the 4x4 square that's receiving more water than it needs, either from environmental inconsistencies, from your building, your farm, where the trees shade, whatever it is. They're the clearest indicator. So use them. And if you get the yellow sticky cards where you can peel them off, then peel off one side, let it go for a couple weeks. If they start to fill up, make the adjustment, tear off the other side, turn it around, and you can deal with it. So yeah, I do believe that of the tools that are available, the lowest cost, best quality product is the Blue Lab Pulse. Jump on the rewind and go over. I explained what I think you should do with it. I don't want to do it a second time for those that are on, but back up 10 minutes and you'll catch it. Gnats and thrips. So thrips, yes, in a way. Gnats means too much water. Thrips means you have either inconsistent watering that's driving a biological inconsistency. So every single time I've gone to a farm and done a microscope assessment and they had what we call thrips, there was not high enough biological activity. So if you have not high enough biological activity, my interpretation of that is the nutrients are not being delivered fast enough to that plant, which leaves incomplete parts in the leaf, which then becomes food for the thrips, I guess we'll say. So thrips can come from inconsistent watering or a dehumidifier that's overly drying out of soil, but for most farms, you just haven't really properly inoculated, so yeah. So thoughts on montmorillonite clay or bentonite clay when mineral balancing? They're all kind of the same. I think what's important is what type of bentonite is it? Is it a sodium bentonite and does it have a lot of sodium? Is it an aluminosilicate and it has a ton of aluminum? So for me, it becomes what's the extra shit you're getting with that clay product. Some of them got tons of barium and some real nasty stuff. So we sell a bentonite clay that has worked well. So we have this in our CGG distro cart. So we now have been offering all the minerals that we use, and we'll sell them in a 1 pound or whatever you want. You can see the list of all the things that we use. Pretty much everything I use in my consulting is on this list, and you can kind of go through and buy them 1 pound at a time if you want. Or if you want a custom blend based on a mineral recommendation, that's kind of our specialty right now. So we can certainly do that for you. And again, if you want to learn how to do it, we are doing the soil balancing masterclass, and we will fire up here in the next few weeks. So you can go to our website, links in the description, and you can apply to the soil balancing class and get in there. And when you're in the soil balancing class, I provide a calculator tool. So I guess I'll just go ahead and point that out so y'all can see this. So every student gets access to my calculator tool. So the spreadsheet that I just showed is here, right? So everybody has access in the class to the same calculator tool. You can make it do a report. There's a saturated paste test. There's a tool here for calculating the exchange capacity. There's a percentage increase calculator. There's a difference calculator, so you can see the difference between 100 and 200. You can see that's 100% variation. So I'm a pretty big fan of this. We're working on version 2, which will be available pretty soon. But for right now, version 1 is working. I guess we could show how that works right now. So if we punch in the numbers, you can kind of see how this works. So if we take the high values, let me pull those up here. So if we punch in from our example, the high values of 3051 for calcium, 91, 73, 70, other bases is 5.4, and exchangeable hydrogen is 13. And you can start to see how these numbers all interplay. And so if we're aiming for 68% here, 10 to 14% here, and 4 to 7% here, we're a hell of a long ways away from the correct amount of potassium. So if this is an indoor garden, we're going to see yellow stressed out plants because the plant uses potassium to open and close the stomatas in order to manage stress. So this plant is going to very readily turn light yellow and start to burn up, and we're going to scramble for the internet to find out why. And really, we just need to do a soil chemistry. So what you can do with this calculator tool is just punch in numbers. I have some other more complicated strategies, but just for a simple example, let's just like mash the keypad and see what it takes to bring these numbers into balance. So we need to increase both magnesium and potassium, probably quite a bit. That didn't quite do it, so we need to go a little bit higher. And no, maybe not that high. So I don't know, let's just do 350. No, that isn't enough. We need to go that high. So we need to get into 4, above 10, and maintain over 68. So we really should go above this for, it's kind of hard. Oh, I know why. Let's back up. This is why. This is my own example. And okay, so what's screwing us up right now is this exchangeable hydrogen. Watch how much these numbers change when I get rid of this exchangeable hydrogen. Boom. Okay, so exchangeable hydrogen is an entire class period that takes about 2 to 3 hours to cover. In short, what's happening is this soil was made with fish parts. I think the least desirable compost for soil making is that of compost that came from the ocean. I know it's really popular, but it's not good from a number standpoint. It's good from a profitability standpoint. And what happens is these numbers, this number, this number, this number, this number, this one, and this one can only add to 100. So if 13 of that 100 is occupied by exchangeable hydrogen, it takes it away from these here. So these numbers aren't wrong. It's just the exchangeable hydrogen is screwing you up. So now watch what happens if you're a fish hydrolysate feeder and you do that for a few runs in a row and you push that to 23, it drops these even more because again, they can only, all 5 of these numbers can only add up to 100. So Dr. Albrecht in his books did studies, the ones that are here behind my back, you should check them out. He has pictures of plants that are grown at different ratios of this base saturation consideration. He found that if calcium is below 60%, most plants will not even grow true to their type. So that's a significant problem. These plants, if this exchangeable hydrogen creeps any higher, is going to drop this below 60. And so let's see, what were we at before? We started at 13. So when it's at 13, it's not bad, but it still really needs to be more like 7. 7's not bad. So through one harvest cycle, if you don't add more, it's likely to drop from 13 to 7 maybe. It might only drop from 13 to 11. So we're still below that 68%. So even though the soil is popular, it's going to cause you problems for at least the harvest cycle. But I don't know, that's just my opinion. So yeah, I would say Ole Mountain is a problem with fear of being sued. That would be one of my absolute last choices for any sort of living soil, anything. The fish, I don't really understand what the chemistry is. We did an episode with Dr. Arden Anderson on Future Cannabis Project. They got a shitload of views. And we talked about the exchangeable hydrogen. I think part of the issue is, like in fish hydrolysate, they're using these types of compounds to stabilize and reduce and break it down. And so I'm not a chemistry professor. I don't know exactly where it comes from. I just know it's a consequence of the reduction of minerals, I guess we could say. Some of it's good because it allows this exchange to happen and allows nutrients to reduce. And so it needs to be available for this reducing process. But you start to get up, like if you're starting out at a 13 and you got, 91, this shit's going to be starving, y'all. Like these plants are going to be starving. So if you're starting out at, is that what we're at? 5.4, 30, 51. So if we even take all of them to the high here, this still isn't going to be good. You got to get this above 10. You got to get this above 4. So that's a significant problem in my opinion. Whoops, I did that backwards, I guess. Hold on, let me put the right numbers back in. Sodium was 70. Magnesium was 91. Tribun. Sorry. There we go. So if this is where we're starting, like this is not going to be good for plant growth. Now, this soil still looked fairly attractive for the saturated paste test, and this is my argument. I don't care with the saturated paste test. This is a real problem that needs to be addressed, and it has to do with inconsistency in the soil manufacturing process, and it just needs to be dealt with. So generally speaking, we need to get this above 300. We need to get this above 300, and we need to drop this down to somewhere between 3 and 5. That's still not quite right, so we need to go 350. No, more than that, 375. So you can just mash the keypad. I mean, there's a little bit more art to it, but I'm trying to keep it really simple for the purposes of, this thing. More importantly, I want you to see that, okay, so that's fairly manageable. I would still go higher. So we need to get at least, somewhere. So let's see, magnesium was at 91 and we're going all the way to 350. So we go all the way, we go like this. And that shows us we have whoa. Sorry, I'm trying to do this with one screen. There we go. No big deal, 300% short. So we're 300% short on magnesium. And what is potassium? We got to get to 447% low of potassium. That just flat out needs to be addressed. So this is a problem, yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Well, I can tell you why this show doesn't have more viewership, because I'm speaking the truth. And in a world of insanity, the truth sounds fucking crazy. And, all I can say is that I've analyzed every consultant, every advisor, every internet hero, every internet mascot, every person that's been paid by a business to sell you shit. I've analyzed put numbers to it, tried to push the farm through it. I have a pretty clear view of what's going on in the world. And I'm not perfect, and sometimes I make mistakes, but yeah, I do believe that my opinion is right. But I would like to clarify is I don't make opinions, I make statements based on historical data. And I think there's a tremendous difference. I don't make opinions. If I'm telling you something, it's coming from repeated, replicated trials, I guess you could say, or very literal experience in the field trying to make things right for farmers. So, Yeah, and I think bare minimum, just to kind of wrap it back up to the basics of soil, is at minimum you should be testing your soil regularly. Even if you're a small home gardener, if you're running, you know, 4 pots at home and you do a soil test that's $68, you will get that money back, I guarantee. And so a lot of times it's hard for the smaller growers to justify some of these expenses. But even in the most micro scale of growers group members and students from the class that we guide through this process, they always get their money back in any effort they put into soil chemistry. And it's not only getting your money back, it's not having catastrophic crop loss, right? So if we can do some level of preliminary data and testing to know where we are at, we can fill the gaps from where we're at to where we need to go in a very calculated, strategic fashion. And I'm not saying you got to turn yourself into a spreadsheet gangster, but if you have any desire to cultivate cannabis from this point forward, you cannot be casual and wing it. You need to know where you are at, and you need to know where you are going. This is the era of actually knowing why, not knowing the person that sets up the speakers for the event, or not knowing the most people on the internet. Like, you need to know. You need to know what you are doing. You need to know why you're doing it. You need to have some sort of foundational principles that led you to that knowing. And if you don't have that knowing, you better get that knowing quick, or you're just going to be a hobbyist grower. And you might not even have that opportunity. So this is a very serious time in cannabis specifically. It's an even more serious time in food. They're starting to announce food shortages. They're starting to scare the hell out of you. Well, during World War II, 42% of the nutritional needs of the United States was provided in small market gardens. So we got some microwaves a few years ago and we kind of forgot all that shit. It's time to remember now. And you're not going to be able to provide food for yourself unless you know what is going on with your soil. This is your most important asset. And in the cannabis industry, hydroponics is not going to make it as a long-term strategy because they are forced to repurchase and rebuy their substrate, and you are not. You just need to maintain that. And on a dollar per dollar square foot cost, if you're doing coca coir drain to waste, if you're doing rock wool drain to waste, if you're throwing away soil, you will not be financially viable into the future. I can promise you. We've been doing these calculations since 2016 for some of the largest farms on the planet, and it's just not going to pencil out. You might get another year or two at it, but if you're not putting money into infrastructure now, you will not be able to afford it later. And this is a principle that was being communicated as early as 2016, 2017. Farmers, you know, unfortunately, a lot of them in 2016, 17, 18 were still blowing money in Costa Rica. The people that put money into their infrastructure are the ones that are still around. And as the commodity price drops for flower on the commercial market, whether you're a backyard trapper or a major commercial facility, the prices are not going to be going up. The only prices that are holding are living soil. And I'm starting to get a lot of calls. Something's happened in the last month. There's radical changes coming in the market, and you need to get on it early, or you're going to just be a spectator. So, that's my little rant. So, hell yeah. Hell yeah. I think that's cool, because I was literally mocked and ridiculed by everyone from 2012 till about mid-2019 for following this woman named Dr. Lane Ingham. And now people are going into our classes because of this. That makes me really proud. Take all the biological stuff you can, come back here for mineral chemistry. Don't disregard it. That ain't going to make it. So let's see here. So calcium deficit is a lack of fungi. Okay, so now this is turning into the biological drivers of mineral chemistry. So the reason why Dr. Lane can, come off saying biology is so important is chemistry is a function of soil, and there are chemical reactions. I do believe that the biology drives those chemical reactions. And when we see a soil getting decreased oxygen, the type of organisms change and the availability of nutrients change, and you will see a deficit. So one of the functions of calcium is to hold that, one of the functions of fungi, we need to, one petition, please. Everybody collectively decide on a pronunciation of it so I can just join the group. I like to say fungi. Fungi feels weird to me. Fungi feels very European. Anyways, the purpose of these saprophytic fungi, one of the purposes, they hold calcium in the soil. It actually starts to stick to the outside, almost like those treats at the fair, the rock salt ones. And when you look at it under the microscope, it looks like that. So we're going to do a microscope session on Sunday. I'll try and get Sarah to pull up a picture that you can see that crystallization of calcium. So yeah, one of the main functions of the fungi in the soil is to hold that calcium. Every single cell in a plant needs calcium. We've, for the last 40, 50 years or whatever, have been replacing that calcium with electrolytes, mostly nitrogen and potassium. And in the absence of calcium, you can use electrolytes to draw water into the cells and create plant material, but that will be vulnerable plant material through the duration of that plant's life cycle. So for the context of cannabis, if you have a deficiency in calcium early on and you form that vegetative structure and that plant moves into flowering stages or reproductive stages, those same leaves that you created in the vegetative cycle that were lacking in calcium will continue to be vulnerable to pest and disease. So specifically with the cannabis industry, where most people don't want to spray pesticides on their flower, well, you better damn get that calcium balance correct so that the leaves that you formed in the vegetative phase are still resilient when they're in the flowering phase, when you're no longer able to spray them. So yeah. Right on. So we got the homie, Shokunin, who's been sticking around, tapping in. He's checking his soil. That's great. Jumping the soil balancing class. Let's get it done. Let's see. Oh, this is a nice comment. Doesn't sound crazy to me. It sounds correct. Yeah, cool. Thank you. I do like to think my method is the natural method. We've just figured out how to quantify it. And I do take great pride in that. I mean, there's not a lot of people legitimately quantifying the agricultural process. In cannabis, there's Nick Tomasini, who does Humankind Oregon. That dude's very data-driven. He gets his shit done. He gets it done too. We get it done. Super proud of the work that I do. There's not a lot of other people that are quantifying everything. You get people that are good at soil chemistry. You get people that are good with a microscope. There's very few people that are good at both. And that's why we're making these classes. We're trying to make more people qualified to provide value and not just lip service. So let's see here. Yeah, this is why I'm not on social media. It's just a whole bunch of people just making stuff up. And it's like the Hollywood deal where it's like you can't spook the nest, so you don't get to speak at the Emerald Cup. So I'm all about shaking nests. We got shit to do. The planet's changing. The market's crashing. I'm not really worried about popularity. I'm worried about empowering farmers to make educated decisions, to know where they're at so they can know where they're going, so they can have success and maintain viability. That is sustainability. Sustainability is being able to wake up tomorrow and keep farming. So that's my little rant. Let's see here. Let's check out some more. Yeah. So this actually does help if you stop at the correct advice. And so if you're new and you get into some bad wings of agriculture, it's gonna be a rough. Yeah. What's up? Smiley's coming. Hell yeah. This is gonna be exciting. This is gonna be exciting, especially for you all that have been following Smiley's Garden. I am super excited. This is gonna be fun. David King's in there because David King comes from the dinosaur region and people are going extinct in Northern California. David King is not going extinct. He is going to stick around. So yeah, it is cool. And Smiley talks, man. I tell you, I have a lot of respect for Smiley. I'm really looking forward to having him in the class. We've been kind of, casually texting here and there for a lot of years, and it's gonna be really cool to like get in the garden and do it. So plants do crave electrolytes, and we are pretty much on our way to idiocracy. So we gotta get it together. Yeah. So this is the thing for sure. Yeah. If you build leaves with electrolytes instead of calcium and silica and trace mineral balances, you get powdery mildew filled leaves. We are in Mormon country. California kept lighting itself on fire and it was going goddamn crazy. So I left. I never thought I would leave, but I wanted to go to a place where people aren't tripping about food shortages. When I left California, they were talking about some sort of butter storage. My first week here in Utah, they got a butter aisle, y'all. There's no butter shortage in Utah. And nobody's tripping on some food shortage here. And so, there's some kooky shit to deal with, but, you know, I bet 3 women over 60 had a gun in their purse. They ain't tripping in Utah. They ain't tripping. So, yeah, let's do it. Get it in, man. Get it in. And we're going to keep doing them, so it's not like they're going to go away. The soil balancing class will be on a conveyor belt because I think that's one of the biggest needs. The master class, we're trying to keep it small because it is a lot of work for us. So we're keeping it to a small number of people that are very serious about it. The soil balancing class, I can handle more numbers. And I just think there's just, obviously we're biological people. I think the soil chemistry thing is one of the biggest needs. Our current paradigm of managing soil chemistry is not, it's not good. So I hope I said all that to say this. Hope I didn't say too much. Hope I didn't piss too many people off, but there's one thing that I promised you all is that I will be authentic and I will speak my truth. And I appreciate the people that come along and are interested in that truth. Again, I don't want to be fear-mongering or anything like that, but, by 2010, 11, I knew something was up with the environment. And I went to Haiti after the earthquake. I saw what happened there. I built farming systems in Haiti with people that were decimated. It forever shaped my view of the world and how I move through the world. I've been trying to yell and scream since 2012 that the monsters are coming and the food shortages might come, and nobody really listened. I think now in the last year or two, we got like normal suburbanites that only watch network news that are like, I think something's up. I think the weather's different. And especially this year, the weather is different, y'all. And so it's going to take a significantly different strategy for farming any product into a changing climate. And right now we're going to, we're starting to see erratic flows of water. So we're starting to see more drought, and then we're starting to see torrential rain. If you are not managing soil chemistry so that moisture can infiltrate and hold, you are going to have a difficult time farming. If you are not managing biology, that water will not infiltrate and store and hold, and you are going to have a hard time farming. If you're in the cannabis industry and you don't make a strategic approach to how you manage your cost of production, you are not going to farm, and you're just not going to have a chance. That's just the math of it. You will not have an opportunity to produce cannabis into the future unless you get it together with soil chemistry and maintain that soil. So, like GLP is something people love to champion. He has been holding on to that soil, trying to let people know this is an important component. He had the numbers back then. He was trying to tell y'all without making competition. And this isn't just to win a trophy. This is because this is what's needed for you to be a financially viable operation moving into the future. A disposable soil model is not going to be financially viable into the future. I think it'll hang on for a few years in certain markets, but other than that, at least at minimum, variation is going to kill you. So the first primary focus on basic consideration for soil chemistry is making whatever soil you have in your farm as consistent to itself from corner to corner as possible. That's primary focus number 1, in my opinion. And then primary focus number 2 is not disrupting that soil chemistry in some sort of catastrophic way that leads to a dramatic deficit in calcium, too much magnesium, too much potassium, too much nitrogen. That is going to lead to catastrophic crop loss. And, in past years in cannabis, we could afford one that kicked us in the knee a couple more. You can't afford it anymore. That's just plain and simple. You have to produce. And, Sarah and I have provided consulting advice to some of the largest hydroponic farms on the planet. We've done 300,000 square foot hydroponic buildings. I know the numbers. I know the cost of production. I know their obstacles. I know the variation of plant health from corner to corner. When you manage soil chemistry in a living soil, you don't deal with any of those phenomenons. And so the way that you're going to win or maintain viability and economic sustainability is by minimizing variation, managing soil chemistry, and not having to throw away your soil. So I'll just give it a couple more seconds or minutes for some comments, see if anything else comes on. Yeah, that will be cool if it blows up. I think there's some censorship going on, which is hindering the viral effect, we'll say. But again, I think so many people have been conditioned not to like me from the Instagram mascots that I think most people don't even realize why they're afraid of my words. So I appreciate the people that have been here, that have not been manipulated by the Instagram mascots, and they're here for the truth, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate you guys showing up. And I will continue to show up, and I will continue to provide value, and I will continue to pump out extremely qualified people out of our master classes. That is my primary focus for right now. If you want to continue a career in cannabis industry, this is why we've made these classes. So yeah, man, set the notification, hit the bell, hit the thing. I don't even know what you're supposed to say. I'm still trying to figure out how to be a YouTube content creator. I just know it drives me nuts when they try to force down a notification, but I think there is a notification. It reminds you. I don't even know. But again, I don't like to do any of those YouTube things. And then we're just trying to grow organically, and the people that show up keep showing up, and I'll keep showing up, and we will do the damn thing. So again, one last time, we got soil balancing masterclass coming up, and we're accepting applications for that. We're probably going to start in a few weeks. On Sunday, we're going to be doing a microscope class. Sarah will be here. We'll be live streaming some microscope stuff. Maybe we'll have to see how it goes. And we'll at least be putting up some images and some videos and talking about some basic fundamentals. My microscope masterclass is getting close. It's almost full. That one's a little more complicated, so we keep the classes fairly small. It's going to be open for 7 more days. And then we're going to close that class and get it started. So make sure you get on for that. And yeah, if you need any minerals, anything that I use for mineral chemistry is on our website, cggdistro.com. I'm trying to make it easy to do precision agriculture. So you can buy a pound, you can have us blend it, you can blend it, whatever you want. We're just trying to facilitate people having industry proven leading results, which is what we have in our consulting. We, plain and simple, in the most humble way possible, the results we are getting are leading and shaping the industry, and I want to share that with you. I can share that with you through this channel. I can share that with you through the master classes, and I can share that with you through the products we sell to help your garden. So thanks again, man. I do appreciate it. We've gone through a lot of hazing in this industry, and I really do appreciate when people legitimately see what we're trying to provide and what we're going to do. So, and yeah, bottomless pots. Shit's dope. Get on it. So right on. Thanks for tuning in. See you Sunday. See you next Wednesday. And that's all I got. Peace.